Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming out today and supporting this beautiful film and supporting independent film in the theater. It's very important to do that these days, and so thank you very much. My name is Sean Baker. I'm a film director, and I am honored to be here today to speak with the director and co-writer and the other co-writer of this beautiful film. So let me introduce them right now. We have director and co-writer Jeremiah Zagar. And co-writer Dan Kitrosser. Well, first off, I just wanted to know a little bit about the source material, how the book came to you too, and how, tell me a little bit about why you connected with it and wanted to adapt it for the big screen.
So I was editing a movie in Egypt, and it was called The Square, and it was about the revolution there. And you can sit down if you want. No, we got three. We got 3 seats. This is awesome. Thank you very much. I decided that while I was there that I was going to be a revolutionary and I was going to stay in Egypt and make this movie. And then I came back for Sundance. I had a short at Sundance, and there wasn't enough money to bring me back to Egypt. And I was like, oh, well, I guess I'm not a revolutionary. It was a confusing moment in my life. And I was thinking about what mattered to me, what I really care about. And at the time, I was just kind of wandering around New York City, and there's a wonderful bookstore called McNally Jackson. I went to the We Recommend table there, and I picked up this book, and I read the first page, and it like knocked me out. And the first page of the book is eerily similar to the first page of the movie. It's like almost word for word. It would just like was everything I wanted. And I read it right there in the cafe, and I bought a bunch of copies, and I gave a copy to Dan.
Yeah, and actually the book is actually a novelization of the movie. Actually, how it turned out now. Yeah, that I read it. I mean, Jeremiah gave it to me just as like a friend giving a book to another friend. Before there was thought of the movie, and I had the similar experience of just opening it up, falling right into it. I mean, it's just luscious prose and imagery, and connected to it very deeply, really quickly.
And you reached out to Justin Torres?
Yeah, I reached out to Justin, and I had made this movie in a dream that was also about my family, and it was like kind of a brutal, loving, dirty relationship that was very similar to his. And so I gave him my movie, and I said, let's meet. And I was like, I want to make your book into a movie. What do you think? And we just started talking, and we liked each other. And actually, you know, we'd mentioned before outside, I wanted to make the movie the way you sort of imagined the movie was. I was like, we'll just get a family that's actually a lot like this family, and we'll just get them in a house, and we'll just film them. And he was into that idea, sort of, you know, because I was coming at it from a documentary background, and he loved that. He was like, yeah. And I was like, it'll change, but it'll be fluid. It didn't actually end up being that way, but
just so you know, I was out in the lobby, and I told Jeremiah that actually when I first saw this film, it wasn't until the end credits that I realized it wasn't a hybrid film, meaning that I thought that the three boys were related. I thought they were brothers. They're not. But we'll get to the casting in a minute. But I really thought you had found a family and just sort of fictionalized their life.
That's what I wanted to do. And then, and he was psyched on that. He had met with some people in Hollywood who had wanted to option the book because it was a bestseller and it's so amazing. And they had weird ideas about it. They wanted it to be like, he said the pitch was like Breaking Bad meets Malcolm in the Middle, and it was going to be a sitcom. And it was awkward. I think it was awkward for him. And I think, so sitting down with somebody that understood the book and really, you know, I really just wanted to make the exact book. Like, I didn't want to change. I didn't think I'd have to.
Didn't you mentioned it in one interview where you said this isn't an adaptation, it's a translation or something like that? That's how you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I remember reading Don Quixote and hating it. Like, it was bad. And then I read another translation of Don Quixote years later, and it was amazing. And I was like, oh, wow, translation is an art. You know, there's an art to translating text. I think oftentimes you can destroy great books by adapting them in a way. You know, it's like, for some reason, as filmmakers, we're always told, like, how, you know, you have to free yourself from the book, or like, you know, there's like this idea that the author's work is unadaptable or untranslatable. But I actually don't think that necessarily. And especially in this case, it just seemed like everything we could do to be as close to the text as possible was what we should be doing. And that was kind of how we approached it.
Did the text have these moments that, how did the animation work in? How did that?
So that was a
in the
different,
original?
so that was that was like, so one of the things in the text was that it was from Jonah's point of view. And so in the writing process, something Dan and I always talked about was the fact that we weren't going to have the kind of wall-to-wall voiceover that was what made Jonah active in the book, right? So how are we going to do that became like a main challenge of making the movie. And when we got into the edit, we realized we'd failed. You know, like, you weren't connecting with Jonah. Jonah wasn't the protagonist we needed him to be, and you weren't always inside his mind. And so we were constantly trying to figure out ways of getting into his mind. How do you make him the watcher that is active, you know? And I had done animation in a dream in order to get into my father's psyche. He's the protagonist of that film. And this is actually just like a tidbit, but Dan actually, he digitized all the footage for that film. He was still in college, I think, at the time. You were, right?
Yeah, I lost half of it.
Yeah, he lost half the footage. That's true.
Still working together?
Yeah, but that film was very personal, and Dan is somebody I trust so deeply, and that's the same kind of experience we had. So anyway, so with the animation, so I had this teacher in college named Rob Todd, and he ran this course called, I can't remember. Mike, what was it called? Alternative Film Production. And so Mike was taking that class, and he brought home this unbelievable Czech animation that was photocopied. And the beauty of the animation was not only the way the photocopies moved, but the way the paper moved. Like, you could see the texture of the paper moving, and that the same ethos that we were building the film with in terms of the 16 millimeter that we were shooting and letting the grain really like go big was the same ethos we wanted the animation to have, that it should be tangible and physical.
Well, you certainly have achieved that.
Thanks.
It has that rich texture all the way through. And then jumping to the 16 now. So this is Super 16 or 16?
Super 16.
And matted for 235?
That's right, yeah.
Okay, cool. I like the tech stuff, so sorry about that. Yeah, but it is gorgeous. It really is. And your cinematographer, where did your cinematographer come from?
So Zach and I shoot a lot of commercials and documentaries together, and we were looking for an aesthetic for the film, and we had watched a bunch of movies. We watched Mary Ellen Mark's Streetwise and The Tin Drum, Volker Schlandorf's The Tin Drum.
Both amazing films. Seek them out. They're hard to find, actually. Oh, at least Streetwise.
Streetwise is, yeah, but it's a massive.
I have a DVD if you
want. And so, you know, the beauty of those films is like it gives you, they feel like, I mean, especially Streetwise feels like this weird fever dream. You know, it's like you're like, it was really the aesthetic we were trying to achieve, and they also are like, you know, that she lets the grain just go really big too, and I mean, obviously because it's a documentary, but then, you know, the other thing is the colors are incredibly vibrant. So a lot of times when you see, you know, people living in working class worlds, the colors are suddenly incredibly subdued. It's actually interesting in your film, the colors are very vibrant too. And it's like, I think that there's something about children where they see the world, at least I did as a kid, as such a vibrant, colorful universe. And we wanted, you know, to find that kind of technicolor, fever dream memory feeling that we thought of as like being the 1980s, 1990s.
Yeah, you got it. The scene, the star scene, the when they're driving and they're looking up at this beautiful, just sky full of stars. Now, obviously, a camera can't capture that, so you did it CGI, I assume. But what is wonderful about it is that that's how, when you go to Big Sky Country and you look up at the stars, yes, you can be driving through a sodium lamp lit road and still look up and see these wonderful stars. How did that come to you? How did you decide on shooting it that way? Because I don't think I've ever seen that before. And was it in the book, or tell me a little bit about that? That scene really got me.
So every scene in the movie is based on a scene in the book. So it's that scene does take place in the book, but it's sort of like, and we went on this awesome ride and we shot down the stars. And so when the translation of that is visual, right? How do you make that a euphoric experience that might feel like the kids are really experiencing this moment? And there's a wonderful Apichatpong, I'm going to wreck this last name. Do you know this? It's
Just as he
Where
asked,
that's
just
a
calm Joe. Wonderful. Yeah. I don't
So he has a wonderful film called Mobile Men, which you should also seek out, which is
haven't
essentially, it's
seen
just
that
a short film documentary, and where they grab the camera and they sort of move it around. And we had this idea of sort of like an homage to Mobile Men that would then be transformed into this euphoric nighttime dream experience, and where you could feel like, and I think that the key to it was like, in the book, the boys are shooting down the stars, and we all do that. Like, we all as kids look up at clouds and find animals, and we all imagine that we can shoot down the stars. And how do you bring an audience to a place where they can see that? And that wasn't literally possible, so we had to figure out a way to do it with CGI. Yeah.
And speaking of the kids, could you tell me a little bit about working with the children? I just made a film with kids, and it was I learned a lot of lessons about working with kids, and I actually had an acting coach who helped me out tremendously. What was your method?
We did have an acting coach. Her name was Noelle Gentile, and she was wonderful. But we also had Dan. So Dan can tell you a little bit about his background, but he's not only a cinematographer. I'll let you. Oh no, you're not a writer. Sorry, he's also not a cinematographer.
I'm not an editor. I'm still stuck on the fact that you read Don Quixote twice.
I started the first one. It was terrible.
Yeah. No, it's long. It's really long. We the Animal's only 100 pages. I didn't know. So anyway, so I worked because I worked a lot with kids, and I was a children's entertainer and teacher, and so I was happy to bring some of that with the kids. It was wonderful and terrible, and I don't recommend having 3 children at all in any sort of context or configuration. But like a typical day was there was one. Well, there's so many moments that I'm still in therapy for, but one was for a brief moment. I wasn't working with them, and then Jeremy Yakis, our producer, was like, "Dan, you gotta go and stop them." And we were at the house, and they had found in the thrushes a very giant rusty saw. And they were frisbeeing it to one another. And I took away the giant rusty saw, and I was like, guys, you can't do this. To which Josiah said, you never let us do anything. So anyway, none had tetanus during the filming, so I feel like great success.
And did they have any previous experience?
The kids, yeah. So the young men had no acting experience, and we had this incredible intern who became our casting director, and she went all over New York City. She saw 1,000 young people.
Who is this?
Her name was Marlena Scrobe.
Oh, great.
And she's the best. And she would see them. I tried to do it at first. I thought I'll just scout them on the street, and it turns out it's very uncomfortable for.
Very. I know, I did the same thing.
Super weird for young mothers to have a bearded man asking come to my basement office. But Marlena had this like way about her where like people just felt comfortable immediately. And so then when the young people were coming to callbacks, me and the acting coach, Noelle Gentile, would start to work with them, and Dan would start to work with them. And so we would all kind of take this tandem familial approach to the process. And we all just kind of, narrowed down this group to smaller and smaller amounts of young people. And then we actually had to postpone a year because we couldn't find Jonah. We couldn't find Evan Rosato. The other two we'd found, they were about 200 and 300 in the casting process, but Evan was like late 800s.
Wow, they're amazing. Okay, well, let's open it up to you guys. Any questions out there? Yes, right over there.
So, obviously sexuality is like a big characteristic of the movie. Could you talk a little about how you approached filming those sorts of scenes with the younger actors? And like how you tried to like either coach them or prepare them to deal with that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so Noelle was, because she's a teacher, was pretty amazing at walking, and is pretty amazing at walking kids through really intense material. And teachers do that all the time. And I think, the young men in this movie they didn't have to watch pornography. That's editing. And like, they didn't have to watch their parents in those situations. That's editing. But they did have to know what they were getting involved in. And she was able to walk them through the process and what it was, and what it meant to honor the novel. That these were experiences that weren't their own, but they were honoring these experiences of Justin and that he put on paper and how important that was. And Justin was on set the whole time also. So I think they felt this incredible need to do honor to, and it's sort of like when you give young people autonomy and you let them know that they're responsible, they sort of rise to the occasion. And that was like the case time and time again. And so they were willing to do things that I think, in a classroom setting might seem awkward. In a film setting, it seemed empowering, I think.
Yes, right there in the center.
Hi, were there any improvised scenes or partially improvised moments?
Yeah. One specifically is the Cractilioso moment. I let Dan tell you about that.
No, there weren't. It was all written. No. Yeah, no. I mean, the Quactilioso moment, we were just, we had to entertain the kids all the time in between sets, and so we were just taught different hand slap games. But I think there was a looseness also to the storytelling. Within each scene, it was very carefully choreographed, but I think Jeremiah led them in such an earnest, honest way that there was freedom within all of those shots and those interactions.
Yeah, and in a specific sense, what we would do is we would do the written words, and then the boys had such charisma and such imagination that we would let them, at the end of every 3 takes, do a improvised take. And sometimes we just use that stuff instead.
Do you feel that as a documentarian as well, because Jeremiah makes documentaries as well, did you bring any of your documentary techniques to the table when it came to directing or covering?
Yeah, I mean, we do. Yeah, I mean, I think it's more of an ethos than like a technical thing that we brought to it. I mean, it was like when we make documentaries, we try to create, I call it like a campfire experience. Like you're at a campfire and you're sitting there and suddenly like you're willing to talk about stuff that you never talk about before. Or otherwise. And so it was like, how do we create environments that are as intimate as documentary environments? And that was sort of the ethos of the film. And I think it sort of became the ethos of the entire set. Like everybody on set felt like they were in like this weird documentary, and everybody became part of the movie making process. Like the whole crew were the parents to these kids in a way, and everybody was involved in watching the birth of this movie happen. And so it was almost like you were just recording the birth of a movie in the sense of its level of intimacy.
How big was your crew, if you don't mind me asking?
44 Yeah.
It was pretty hefty.
It was hefty. And when it would shrink, so it could expand and contract. So if we were doing some of those sexually explicit scenes, the crew would shrink. We would shrink the crew down, and everybody would go outside and take naps, and we would do work inside.
And you mentioned outside that you worked with the children for quite a long time, right?
Yeah, so the two boys we worked with for Isaiah and Josiah, we worked with for 1.5 years, and Evan we worked with for 6 months on top of that.
And when you say work with it, these were workshops, or how did it play out?
Yeah, sort of. So the way we would do it is we would get them every weekend to come to like a park or to our office, and then we would do scenarios that were just like scenarios that were in the movie, but we wouldn't do it with the script. So they were exactly what the scene was, but we wouldn't do it. Or there's a beautiful, I think, behind the scenes documentary that'll come out soon, where Dan taught Evan how to scream, because Evan had never enunciated before, like loudly. He's a very quiet young man. Maybe.
Yeah, we just we were trying to get him to scream. I'm sure his mom is really thankful that we taught him that skill. But yeah, it was we wound up just slowly going through different animal sounds and like running around the park. And so, it started a snake, moved to a dog, and then ended a lion. And it was really cool to see him, expand over that hour. It was really awesome. And then he just kept screaming.
Did you have any problems with sugar on set?
Oh my
Because
God.
we did.
Oh my God, so much, because you want to placate them. And then, we just drugged the hell out of the children with the sugar, and then there was a Benadryl crash that would end up happening because one of them kept having an allergic reaction. So yeah, it was almost like the old studio system, and they were Judy Garland. I mean, I hope it all turns out all right.
We after our 4th day, we switched out. We swapped everything out for sugar-free without telling them. But the next morning, for some of it, it wasn't.
Oh no!
Don't eat a whole bag of sugar-free gummy bears. It's not going to be good for your stomach.
So we wanted. I forget who, but it was like they had somehow decided that these things were granola bars. They were Captain Crunch, like sugar-infested demons. But they're like, I need more granola bars, and I was like, shush, please be nice to me. I'm just a sad gay writer. Just here's your sugar.
How did you two meet?
So we met because I'm surprised that you don't know about the 1997 production of Lost in Yonkers at Akiba Hebrew Academy right outside of Philadelphia.
Sorry.
You guys, because Jeremiah directed and I was Jay Kernitz, and my brother played my uncle. More questions about that production. Where was that not in your materials?
You've been working together ever since? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Dan was he's wonderful in that play, but he was he also moved to New York City and is just a very close friend, and we've been talking about working together for a while actually. And he had as you can see, Dan is very funny, but he also is incredibly non-judgmental and open, and it's a hard thing to find in a partner who he's somebody who's as sweet as Dan. And so when we'd made In a Dream, it was dealing with very intense familial stuff. Dan was my go-to, and so anytime I'm dealing with intense stuff, Dan's a wonderful collaborator because he's a wonderful man.
It's also really nice that...
And he's talented, very talented.
It's also really nice that Dan's on set. That's a rarity, I have my co-writers on set because I feel as if, like, why not? They can. You're there if you're finding the film. Sometimes it's great to have your collaborator there to share ideas with, to bounce ideas off of. But it's a rarity because sometimes producers don't want the writer around. They ban them from the set almost.
Well, I think that's a testament to our producers and also to CineReach. I think it's like they were down with as people being as involved as possible, which I think is a rarity and also is a shame. It's like, it was a family, and nobody was getting paid anything. So it was like, let's all just do this together. Let's all just be together. And then it was valuable because when you have to cut days or you have to change scenes, Dan was down, and if you have to take care of the young men, Dan was down, and he took a lot of abuse, and that's it's moving. It was moving for me. It was like he was there, and his husband to now came up and stayed with us, and it was like, it really just, everybody just kind of pitched in where they could.
That's great. And it's great to hear about CineReach. They're a wonderful nonprofit based in New York that helps indies like this get off the ground, and sometimes they fully finance. Did they fully finance?
They fully financed this film.
That's wonderful. So they've only fully financed a few films now. Beach Rats, your film, maybe one or two others.
Beasts and Beasts of Southern Wild.
They did Beast completely?
They did Beast completely. They did Beach Rats. They did ours, and they have a movie about MIA that they fully financed that's coming out later this summer, September 28th.
Yeah, look into them. They're extremely filmmaker friendly. They're always about what whatever makes the best film. So it's really supporting the filmmaker's process. And not wanting to interfere, but just support all the way. They're wonderful. They've helped me twice. Any other questions out there? Yes, miss.
I was just wondering, so obviously like childhood sexuality and like that was definitely a huge theme in this film, but did you find like childhood mental illness at all as something that you wanted to explore through this, and like how the kids kind of explore it? I just related to it a lot.
Yeah, I mean, not childhood. Everybody's mental illness. I think mental illness in general. I mean, mental illness is a funny way to put it specifically, but mania, like, and this is a family that lives in extremes, and Dan and I both come from families that live in extremes, and sometimes have been institutionalized. In the book, there's a scene of institutionalization that we couldn't put in the movie really because of the age disparity, but. Yeah, I mean, and again, like, I think I've been thinking about this a lot recently, actually, because I mentioned our teacher, Rob Todd. He just walked into the woods this weekend and committed suicide, and I think that I was thinking about why people have been asking me, people have been like, why is this movie important, or why is it political, or why does it matter? Why should people see it? And I think, and because it's not a giant, movie about, politics or changing the world or climate change or all the things that are crushing in on us. And I think what it is about is it's about sharing moments that aren't ever really shared. And I think when I read the book, I was like, that reminds me of my family, and feeling connection to other people who experience mania or who experience passion in a way that is frightening, helps you understand your own passions and your own fears and your own insanities, and that, in some ways, is as important, more important to me. Yeah.
Right there. Yes.
I'm wondering, how did Noel translate your adjustments? Did you give your adjustments directly to the young men?
Yeah, I would. I mean, yes, I would give them. You mean to like tell them what to do? Yeah. I would just tell them what to do. But what Noelle did is she put them. The way it worked, sort of, is Noelle would put them in a frame of mind where they were focused. Dan had more trouble with that, but Noelle was able to put them in a frame of mind.
Still a great man, though.
He is a great man. She was able to, because that's her, she understood how to like calm them down and get them to a place. And then so did Raul and Sheila. Like, the amazing thing about working, and I wonder if you had the same experience, like the kids, when they watched Raul and Sheila and watched them deal with how they would prepare, they would sort of want to do that. Like,
yeah, to a certain degree, especially Brooklyn. Because she's Brooklyn Prince, who is the lead of my film. She's such a professional. This is what she wants to do in life. So she's constantly, she was the one who was really just studying the way that these actors were working, and because she wants to do this for the rest of her life. The other two were just not as closely
completely
connected,
focused. And I think, you know, the thing about them being brothers made them all want to do whatever the other one was doing and better. They were like, I can listen to my headphones and get ready for this part better. And like, so they would all go into like their corners and they would put on their headphones by the end of the thing and they would listen and they would get ready. It was funny. In the beginning, they were throwing saws, and by the end, they were like really like kind of trying to be Raoul and Sheila, like watching how. I think the first time they saw like Sheila smack Raoul in the face in real life, like it wasn't a stunt, you know, or like the way they watched Raoul or Sheila cry on cue, and they were just like, how do you do that? And like their minds started churning and being able to actually do it, which was amazing.
I think some of our adults were looking at Brooklyn to emulate her. Any others? Right over there.
Yeah, more technical question. Specifically about the improvisational like approach that you described, and this kind of goes to what Sean was asking earlier about you know, shooting on film, you know, so you're limited by your roles, and could you talk about that choice to shoot on film and not having the luxury of doing like longer takes?
Yeah, maybe you could speak to this too. I mean, for us, shooting on film was liberating because, first of all, the kids have a short shelf life no matter what. Like our kids could do no more than 3 or 4 takes, and then they were done. So the improvising was helpful because it got them revitalized, and it made them get excited again about doing the scene, and it let them know that, you know, the camera could kind of go on them at any time, and so they were, you know, more fluid, and then they would get back to the text. And you know, so we never spent more than our allotted film for the day, just because everybody was so focused on making sure that they were going to get it right. Whereas I think with digital, when I shoot digital at least, there's less of that focus because there's, you know, more potential to do it over and over again. And it's just like some more, yeah.
Yeah, what he said. No, but there's that discipline that people talk about that comes to the set when you're shooting on film that you can basically apply to the kids if you'd like, you know, and that's what we did. I mean, there was like, I think we were about a week in, and when you got the 3 kids together, I'm talking about Florida Project, when the 3 kids were sort of maybe getting out of hand a little bit or getting rowdy. One time I said, hey guys, you hear that sound? The sound of that's the film going through the gate. That's my money burning. So, so keep fooling around. You're burning my money. And I remember them looking at me like, really? I was like, well, not really, but yeah. But that actually got them very focused. So that's one aspect to it. And also, I think, you know, I think it's a myth that actually, you know, yes, you can shoot more digital. You can maybe shoot all day with digital, but when it comes down to it, with films like this, and you know, there's a control that you need, and there's only so many takes you're going to do anyway, and the costs really not that big of a difference. They're really, you know, I think that it's really great that you guys shot on film. It looks gorgeous. I don't think this would have looked. It wouldn't have looked this way on digital, and so I think that you made the right choice. And it's a great time to support film. It's very important. You know, we, as I always say, you know, the threat of the death of celluloid is a real thing right now, unless filmmakers like us support Kodak and keep the labs open and keep this wonderful medium alive. So, yeah.
100% with that.
Oh, we have to call it. Okay, one more question? No? One more question? Yes, sir, right there.
So I was wondering about some of the more dreamlike sequences in the film, the underwater stuff as well as the flying. Was that in the book, and what does that sort of represent for Jonah?
It is in the book. It's, again, it's like a heightened visual motif in the movie. So there's a lot of underwater in the book. But it's heightened in the film. And there's flying in the book, but it's heightened in the film. So I could go through each scene and tell you how, but just, you know, as one example, in the book, the protagonist, who's unnamed in the book, is 17, or around there when he has a sexual experience in the back of a bus with a man that triggers his parents finding his journal. And we knew that we couldn't do that. We didn't want to age Jonah, and that kind of sexual experience means a lot different thing for a 17-year-old than it does for an 11-year-old. And so one of the things Dan and I, the biggest change that we worked on was creating a character that would be Jonah's love interest, that he could have an experience with, and what that experience would be and how it would become a magical moment. It's a very magical moment in the book, and we were focused on creating a moment that that felt like euphoria and also felt like terror at the same time. And the book does this wonderful thing, which I think is, I think it's sort of the most important theme for me, which is that, which is actually a lot like making a movie, is that the difference between drowning and flying is very, very small. It's like a very thin difference. And when you make a movie, you feel like that. You're like, my life, this film will either bury me or it will fly. And like, that's what this young boy, he's dealing with that kind of intensity day to day. And he's like, either I'm going to drown or I'm going to fly. And that's sort of the thematic, visual thematic.
Cool, very nice. Well, thank you everybody for coming out. Thank you, Landmark. Thank you, The Orchard. And please spread the word about this beautiful film. Tell your friends to see it on the big screen. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.